Through representing the complexity of human experiences, again, like these questions love to have complexity, and it's a bit of a trap. It's almost a deliberate trap, right? Because it's going to separate, the men from the boys, so to speak, right? Because what happens there is the weaker responses are going to be using the word complexity a lot without actually saying what the complexity is. That's the key. That's the key distinction between the band 6 student and the band 4 student, okay? The band 6 student is going to tell me what the complexity is, and they're not going to worry about using the word complexity too much. They're going to tell me what the complexity is in relation to the other keywords of the question, okay? So it'll tell me what are the relevant human experiences that are complex, and it'll tell me why they're complex. It also says through representing those experiences, composers challenge responders, okay, where challenged. You need to talk about how the responder is engaged here to reflect on their understanding of themselves and the world. Very generic question. Not my favorite question, but that's okay. It's very generic, but it's about how does it prompt self-reflection, and how does it tell us about where we sit in the world? What I would say with the Crucible, you need to be thinking about what's our responsibility in the world when we go through this text, okay? So that's the first thing to be aware of, Madhav. You want to be aware that when it says, what's our understanding of ourselves, think about, it's more so, I would interpret that as saying, what's our role? Because the Crucible is trying to wake us up. You watch that play, you're meant to be woken up. And when you're woken up, you're basically meant to become aware of the way in which power structures are exploited in society, the way in which we are, and it's happening today. It's so interesting. I'd love to just like speak to you guys on it more generally, but I'll try and keep this practical and maybe just remind me at the end and I can speak on it. But right now, today, in the world we're in, especially in America, on social media, it's so divided. The world's so divided, right? It shouldn't be like that. You should have a whole group of individuals thinking for themselves, but it just doesn't work like that. As soon as someone has power over the way people think, they basically control that whole group, right? And they can control the world if that group is big enough. And the Crucible is trying to wake you up from that, because as soon as you stop thinking for yourself, you become highly exploitable and you'll be taken advantage of. And what you'll do is you'll forfeit your moral integrity. All of your morals, all of your values will go out the window if you become part of a group and you can't divorce yourself from that group in any respect. So it's one of those weird things. When you guys hear about like political parties and stuff, I always find it fascinating when someone says, I'm a member of the Liberal Party. I'm a member of the Labour Party. What do you mean you're a member? Would you like, are you going to, I always get worried. Are you going to think for yourself? And, in America, they say I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat. It's like, okay, some people are using that in a general sense to say, I generally like agree with their policies. But the worrying thing is what you see throughout history, even with the Crucible, with the witch hunt, is as soon as people are made to fear the consequences of disagreeing with the group or the party that they're aligned with, then that's a horrible thing, because you've lost all your individuality. It's like, why aren't you agreeing with some of each party? Why can't you agree with something? When you're a member, what have you signed up for? And what are you giving up? So it's important to retain your individuality. This relates to the Crucible and a lot of the other texts that are studied in the Common Module. And if you forfeit your individuality by conforming to a group, to a collective ideology, which is exactly what was happening at the time that the Crucible was written, right? McCarthyism. Americans were losing their democratic freedoms, right? Ironically, as America was trying to defend democracy as a whole against the Soviet Union, communism, they were worried about losing their freedoms. Americans were getting brainwashed through fear. They were worried about being accused of being communists. And actually, what that meant was, because they were afraid of being called something, they were afraid to speak out, because if they spoke out, then you'd be accused of being a communist. So it's kind of this paradox where you can never get out of it. And suddenly you've lost all of your freedoms. You don't even have free speech. And that's what happens when you feel like you're going to get isolated from a group. And you see this all over the internet now as well. You see people, as soon as you say one thing that is inconsistent, to use a rubric term, with a belief of a minority group or something like that, then you are demonized and ultimately deplatformed and censored, right? So there's this mass censorship going on across a lot of the big tech, companies at the moment. And, that's not a good thing, in my opinion. So we want freedom of speech. We want these freedoms. So hopefully I've kind of answered that it challenges us to reflect on our position in the world. Well, we need to assume responsibility and we need to speak up. We need to be like John Proctor in the way that he defended truth and he actually gave up his life for it. So it's a very dramatic and extreme example. It's a hyperbole of what our responsibility in this world is. We have to stand up for what we know to be true. Otherwise, there will be grave injustices and people will fully lose their moral integrity just to belong to a community. But it's a community built on nothing. It's built on false foundations. It's built on weak foundations. It's built on the foundations of tyranny. And that's what results, right?